Hello and welcome, it's Chris from Christopher Holt Training, and welcome to this tutorial where we're going to talk about the best way to build core strength and stability. We're going to break it into three parts. Part one, we're going to look at some fundamentals of the core. Part two, we're going to look at how people are doing it at the moment. And then part three, we're going to talk about what I think is the best way to go about doing it. Before we get into that, I just quickly want to mention my social media. So if you come along to Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube, just type in Christopher Holt Training. You will find me there. Please do like, follow, subscribe. If you're on YouTube, please do subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon, and you'll be notified whenever I release my tutorials. Alternatively, you can go to the link in the description and you can click through to my How to Build Core Strength and Stability 12-week online program, which will take you all the way from beginner all the way to advanced in the matter of 12 weeks. You'll be sent workouts every 2 weeks, plus you get supplementary workshops and tutorials to help educate you all the way along as well. And finally, please do comment and ask any questions, pop any feedback in the comment section below. I'm more than happy to answer any questions and follow up on any comments and things like that. So please do that in the comment section below. What we'll now do is get stuck into the tutorial. Part one is looking at two fundamentals of training, but one part of that, or one half of that, is about the core. So there are two fundamentals that we're going to talk about. Number one is the torso is designed to prevent movement. Number two, the limbs are designed to produce movement. So what that basically means in practice, if we look at an exercise where we lift a weight from the floor, so let's look at the deadlift. Now, this exercise requires the hips to produce movement to help lift from the floor. So we're looking at the glute muscles, so the gluteal muscles, the buttock muscles. We're looking at the quads, the hamstrings. So all those muscles of the limbs are there to produce movement. The reason why is because they're much bigger, more powerful muscles. When we talk about the core, what we want is that to prevent movement. So we want that posture and that position of the spine to remain stiffened and in position, so that when we hold on to the bar with the arms, that they aren't affected. Because if we lift with the legs, we bend at the spine, we won't lift the weight from the floor. But if we can produce the movement from the limbs, maintain the posture of the spine, the arms just act like a lever that are hanging off the torso that is stiffened and in position and can lift off the floor. So as soon as we bend the spine in a deadlift exercise, it's called an energy leak, and that energy leaks out, and then we lose that and we are less able to lift it from the floor. So those are the two fundamentals that we want to think about when we're developing the strength, the endurance and the stability of the core that wraps around the spine. So what we're now going to do is we're going to look at some exercises that people are using at the moment and see how it fits with those two fundamentals. So how people are building their core strength and stability at the moment is using exercises like the sit-ups, like the crunches, like side bends, back extensions, twisting exercises. Now, what this is doing, this is producing movement at the spine, which goes against that first fundamental that we talked about preventing movement of the spine. Now, the reason I'm saying that it goes against it and that we want to, in some respects, not do those is, number one, we are producing movement of the spine. Now, what that's doing, that's working the muscles of the torso individually, because when we curl up in a sit-up or a crunch, that's using the rectus abdominis. When we do a twisting exercise, that's using more the obliques to produce that movement. Back extensions is using the erector spinae. And again, that's producing movement of the spine. Now, what people will assume is if they have strong individual muscles, that means, therefore, that your torso is strong. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite work like that. If we want the entire torso to be strong, we have to train all the muscles, or at least most of the muscles, or as many muscles as we can, together. So what they are learning is how to knit together and hold the torso in a strong position. Now, we can get that out of doing exercises like deadlifts, like squats and rows and presses and things like that. But what we also need to be able to do is do that in static exercises that we can, in some respects, sort of isolate that area of the body off a little bit more, because then we can train that way. And that's what we're going to talk about in part number 3 when we come to it. So coming back to these exercises, so number 1, they produce movement at the spine, which in some respects conflicts with the first fundamental that we talked about. When we also produce movement of the spine, we can create damage at the spine. So if we are flexing forward in a sit-up and a crunch, that in a sense is a mechanism of injury for disc herniation and disc bulges. And it acts very much like a credit card. So when we look to break a credit card in half, obviously we can use a pair of scissors, but if we do it the manual way, we would bend it back and forth. And then eventually the fibers in that credit card fatigue, and it breaks. Now that's not to say that your spine will break, but what it will do is the fibers and the structures of the spine will fatigue, and then eventually they will injure. And as a general rule, it comes out as a disc herniation or a disc bulge. If we go the other way into back extensions, it's very similar in that it wears the tissues down, but it affects a different part of the spine, and it's the facet joints that go in between the vertebrae. Because we are in a sense sort of crashing them together, it can make those joints inflame, which again deteriorates the ability of the spine to be able to hold proper posture. And then finally, when we look at twisting exercises, that's very similar in the way that it affects the vertebrae. And what it's doing is, if you look down on a vertebral disc, you've got a jelly-like fluid in the middle. So you've got a jelly-like fluid in the middle, and then you've got all these rings and fibres around the outside, much like a tree. And then what happens with all the twisting exercises that people do of the spine is that starts to delaminate and, in a sense, destructure those rings. And then what happens is the fluid then moves through it easier. So if we combine the twisting and the sit-ups and the crunches, that then again goes to devalue the structure of the spine and increases the risk of injury of the spine. So again, there's 3 reasons that we want to be sort of moving away from those types of exercises. So what we've looked at are the sit-ups, the crunches, the back extensions and the twists. We've looked at number 1, that they produce movement of the spine, and number 2, that they, in a sense, they destructure and delaminate and devalue the structures of the spine, which is something that we want to avoid. So what we're going to look at now are some sort of better exercises, and we're going to talk about how those exercises bring that core strength and stability to the torso. Now we're talking about what I think is the best way to build core strength and stability. And we're going to refer back to those 2 fundamentals that we talked about at the beginning of this tutorial. So what we want to be looking for are exercises that maintain that posture of the spine, but they challenge it. But what you're doing is you're trying to hold that position against a resistance. So the sort of 4 most basic exercises that I would always go to for someone who's starting out, so a beginner, would be the plank, the side plank, the bird dog, and the bridge. They would be the 4 fundamental exercises that I would choose for most people to build their core strength and stability. What I would then do is build out from that, because what we are doing is we are starting with these static exercises. Now if we're using deadlifts, squats, like wood chops, what we're doing there is we're using more dynamic exercises. Now again, there's nothing wrong with that, but what I would do is I would use those 4 and then build people into the more dynamic exercises. So I wouldn't necessarily use them straight away, but I have used them straight away. It all depends on the individual that I'm working with. But as a general rule, with regards to beginners, I would start with those 4 exercises. Then I would start building out. So plank, side plank, bridge, bird dog. Now, what those exercises are doing is they are holding the spine in that posture. And then what you're doing is you're creating tension to hold that posture. So as it develops, so we might go from, let's just say an individual can hold a plank for 20 seconds. What we would then do is build that to 30 seconds, 45 seconds, up to a minute. So let's just say we get the plank to a minute. I would generally then sort of stop at a minute, and I wouldn't necessarily want to be holding it for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes. Partly because it can get a little bit tedious and can get a little bit boring for the individual, but also it now gives us an opportunity to start developing the core's ability to hold the spine in position. So what I would think, or what I would look to do, would be then to lift an arm from the floor. So you're still in the plank position, you're still holding that static posture, but what you're now doing is holding, and then you're placing an arm on your lower back. Now the whole time you're keeping your hips centered, so they're not shifting from side to side, and they're not rotating. The reason that it's not doing that is because your muscles are holding the spine in position and preventing that movement of the spine. So it's promoting that first fundamental that we talked about, and it's preventing movement of the spine. So as soon as you lift that arm up, your muscles have got to hold your body in position. You're then using your hip muscles and your legs to hold that position. So number one, the plank, and we can use then the side plank by, again, holding 10 seconds, 20 seconds, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, whatever it needs to be. Then we would start lifting a foot from the floor. Again, using the hip and the lateral part of the torso to hold you in that position. So we are developing, first of all, the ability to hold that position for a prolonged period of time. And then we're lifting either an arm in the plank or a leg in the side plank to then begin challenging that position, because as soon as you lift an arm, your hips are going to want to move. Your spine is potentially going to want to bend. As soon as you lift a leg in the side plank, your hips might want to drop. You might want to drop your body forward, whatever it needs to be. But when we do that, we are challenging those muscles to hold you in that position. So it's developing that core strength, that core endurance to be able to do that, not only for one rep, but over a period of reps. So we then turn from holding it for 30 seconds to a minute to then trying to hold that for 4 reps, 3 reps, 5 reps, 6 reps, whatever it needs to be, of lifting the leg or lifting the arm. And then it's the same with the bridge. So again, what we would do is we would hold up in the bridge, we would make sure we're strong on 2 legs, then we would think about lifting 1 leg from the floor. Again, holding the hips solid, holding them centered so they don't weight shift or they don't rotate. What we can then start to think about is adding weight in, and then we can start moving into hip thrusting on 2 legs and then 1 leg. So again, we're developing the glutes. So all the way around with the plank, the side plank, so the plank we're using sort of the anterior muscles, so rectus abdominis and parts of the obliques. You could even bring pecs in. If you push the shoulders down, we're using the lats a little bit more. So we're starting to use sort of more of these muscles as one unit. It's similar as we go into the side plank. As soon as we lift, or in fact, as soon as we go into the side plank, we use more of the obliques, and less so, but we're using the abdominals as well. We use shoulders. Again, if we push the shoulder down into the rib cage, we're using lats. As soon as we lift the leg up, we're using glute medius, glute minimus to hold us up. So you can start to see now, we're not training individual muscles. We're training more muscles at any one time. And the same with the bridge. As we go into it, we're holding using glutes. As we then start introducing weight, we're now starting to use abdominals and obliques a little bit more. So that is very much a whistle-stop tour of what I think is the best way to start building core strength and stability. Now, when we talk about doing these exercises, we talk about doing static and dynamic ones. If you are a beginner, I recommend starting more with the dynamic ones and then moving into, more with the static ones and then moving into the dynamic ones. Obviously, if you're more intermediate advanced, then you can sort of play between the two of them. And as I mentioned, if you go to the 12-week online course, that's the link below, you start off as the beginner, you start off with these 4 fundamental exercises, and then we start to grow out into more exercises, building core strength and stability all along the way. So I could talk for much longer and talk about more exercises and how they can develop, but I think I've talked enough for this tutorial. So what I'll allow you to do is digest that information. If you need to review it, then by all means go back through it, and by all means add some comments below, because it'd be great to sort of clarify any understanding that you may need from that. So many thanks for watching. My name is Chris from Christopher Holt Training. I'll speak to you in the next tutorial.